Hello, sports fans. Welcome to Super Sports Central. Today, we're going to be going over my Week 3 college football predictions. So last week in Week 2, I had a record of 20-3, and that brings my record on the season to 38-6. Kicking things off with the one game we have on Friday, and that is Indiana State at Indiana. And this game is not going to be close. Indiana, they've looked pretty good so far this season, and they're coming off a 56-9 win over Kennesaw State. Indiana State is 2-0, although they are an FCS team, and I don't really think this game is close. I've got Indiana winning big, 59-3. Moving to the games on Saturday, kicking things off with Oregon at Northwestern. This is another game that I don't think is going to be very close. For Oregon, they've looked great so far this season, as they're 2-0, and they just scored 69 points last week against Oklahoma State. Now, for Northwestern, they're 1-1, and they lost to the only FBS team they've played so far this season. But I think this is another really easy win for Oregon. I think quarterback Dante Moore has another big game, and Oregon wins easily 47-10. Moving on, we have Clemson at Georgia Tech, and this is a really interesting game. And there's definitely the possibility for an upset this week. But Clemson, they haven't looked that good so far this season, as obviously they lost to LSU in Week 1, and in last week they only beat Troy by 11. And then they'll face a Georgia Tech team that's 2-0, and Georgia Tech is also known for beating ranked ACC teams, as under head coach Brent Key, Georgia Tech is 6-1 against ranked ACC opponents. Although Georgia Tech, they haven't beaten Clemson since 2014. But offensively for Georgia Tech, they're built around running the ball with quarterback Haynes King and running back Jamal Haynes. Although it is very difficult to run the ball against a very strong Clemson defensive front. Then on the flip side, the Clemson offense has really struggled to get going each of their first two games, and they're averaging just 18.5 points per game so far this season. And quarterback Cade Klubnik has not been good, with 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions so far this year. And the Clemson offense, they face a Georgia Tech defense that is good. And this is a really tough game to predict. I do like this Georgia Tech team, but I'm going to take Clemson to get the win. I think the Clemson defense contains the Georgia Tech run game, and they force Haynes King to beat them through the air. And I do think Haynes King is capable of doing that, but he also would be throwing against a really good Clemson secondary. But I have Clemson in a defensive battle by a score of 21-18. Moving on, we have Oklahoma at Temple. So Oklahoma, they've looked good so far this season, and they're coming off a big win over Michigan 24-13. They don't have to go to Temple, which is very interesting, but they go to Temple, who is also 2-0, although Temple, they've beaten UMass and Howard. Well, Oklahoma, they're the clear better team here. I don't really have a ton to say about this game, but I've got Oklahoma winning easily 45-13. Next game, we have Wisconsin at Alabama. So Alabama got a good bounce-back win last week as they destroyed UL Monroe 73-0. And they face a Wisconsin team that isn't great, although they are 2-0. But they haven't been too impressive, as they have a 17-0 win over Miami, Ohio, and a 42-10 win over Middle Tennessee. But the offense for Wisconsin already isn't anything too impressive, and now they're going to be without starting quarterback Billy Edwards Jr. And they faced an Alabama defense that was terrible against Florida State, although bounced back in a big way last week. Now, on the offensive side of things for Alabama, they were also not good against Florida State, but they scored 73 last week, so they definitely seem to be back on track. Although they do face Wisconsin defense that has been pretty good so far this year, allowing under 200 yards per game. But this is a game that I don't think is going to be that close. Alabama, they're the much better and much more talented team, plus they're at home. I've got Alabama easily 41-10. Next game, we have Central Michigan at Michigan. So Michigan, they're looking to bounce back after they lost to Oklahoma last week, and they'll need to do so without head coach Sharon Moore, as he is suspended for this week's game and next week's game as a result of the sign-stealing scandal from a few years ago. Now, luckily for Michigan is this week they get a pretty easy opponent in Central Michigan who's not great, and they just got demolished by Pitt last week. Now, the interesting thing in this matchup is Central Michigan has actually done a really good job stopping the run so far this year, and that includes last week against Pitt. But while they have been good against the run, Central Michigan has been awful through the air. But where this gets interesting is that is the exact opposite of what Michigan wants to do offensively. Now, I do still think Michigan could find some success on the ground, but I do think they might have more of a downfield passing game to win this game convincingly. Now, on the flip side, the Central Michigan offense is pretty bad. They scored just an average of 15 points a game so far through 2 games, and I don't think they're going to do much against a good Michigan defense. Well, I have Michigan getting the win here. I think this game could be a little closer than expected if they can't run the football, but I still think Michigan wins fairly easily, 24-3. Next game, we have South Alabama at Auburn. So Auburn is ranked inside the top 25 for the first time since 2021, and they've been pretty good so far this season. They don't face a South Alabama team that is decent. They played a close game against Tulane last week, and I definitely think there's a chance they can keep it close against Auburn. But on the offensive side of things for Auburn, they've been great on the ground so far this year, averaging well over 250 rushing yards per game. And that is a terrible matchup for South Alabama, as their defense has really struggled to stop the run, allowing over 180 rushing yards in both their games this season, and one of them was against an FCS team. Then on the flip side, I don't see Alabama having a ton of success offensively, as they face an Auburn defense that has been pretty good. But this is a game that could be close, but I really don't think it's going to be that close. I think Auburn has another big game on the ground, and I've got Auburn beating South Alabama easily 42-6. Moving on, we have Missouri hosting Louisiana. So Missouri, they've looked good so far this season, especially offensively, and quarterback Bo Pribula has been great so far, with 7 touchdowns in 2 games. Although the Missouri offense, they face a Louisiana defense that isn't that bad. Now, the Louisiana defense isn't bad, their offense is awful, and I really don't think they're going to do anything against a Missouri defense that is quite good. But I can see Louisiana keeping this game close if they can keep it low scoring, but as soon as Missouri's offense gets going, it is way too much for Louisiana to keep up with. I've got Missouri easily 38-14. Moving on, we have Villanova at Penn State. This is another game for Penn State that won't be close. So far this season, they have beaten Nevada by 35 and FIU by 34. They don't get their easiest non-conference opponent in Villanova, who's an FCS team. Not much to say about this game. Penn State wins big 52-3. Next game, we have Georgia at Tennessee. And this is a really interesting game. Both these teams are 2-0, and this is a big early season test for both teams. On the offensive side of things for Tennessee, they've been great this year through the air and on the ground. And one of the big questions for Tennessee coming into this season was the quarterback spot with Joey Aguilar, but he's been great for Tennessee in their first 2 games. But Aguilar and the Tennessee offense, they face a Georgia defense that has allowed just a combined 13 points over their first 2 games. Then on the flip side, Georgia's offense is solid, although they only put up 28 last week against an FCS team in Austin Peay. And then they'll face a Tennessee defense that has been pretty good so far this season, although they are allowing 21.5 points per game. But this is a game that I definitely think could go either way, and this is a game that is extremely tough to predict. I do think this is going to be a lower scoring game, as both these teams are pretty good defensively, and I do think Tennessee has the better offense, which would give them the advantage in this game, but I also just don't trust Tennessee to beat Georgia, because they haven't beaten them since 2016. But I really have no idea who to pick here. I wasn't super high on either team coming into the season. I've been more impressed with Tennessee and how Joey Aguilar has looked at quarterback. Plus, Tennessee's at home, so I'm going to take Tennessee with the upset win by a score of 24-20, but this is a game that can definitely go either way. Up next, we've got Oregon State at Texas Tech. So Texas Tech, they've gotten off to a great start so far this season, and they've outscored their opponents 129-21. Now, they have played 2 terrible teams, as they've played Arkansas, Pine Bluff, and Kent State, but that is still pretty impressive. But now, Texas Tech, they face an Oregon State team that has gone off to a rough start as they're 0-2, with losses against Cal and Fresno State. Now, Oregon State has really struggled defensively in both those games, allowing at least 34 points in each game. And that is just a terrible matchup for Oregon State, because their defense is already not playing well, plus they have to face a Texas Tech offense that has scored at least 60 in each game. Now, the Oregon State offense isn't terrible, and they're led by former Duke quarterback Malik Murphy, but I just don't think Murphy and this Oregon State offense is good enough to score enough points to keep up in this game. Texas Tech is another huge offensive game, and they win this game pretty easily by a score of 49-17. Next game, we have Arkansas State hosting Iowa State. So Iowa State, they've been great to start the year as they're 3-0, and they're coming off a big win over Iowa. For Arkansas State, they're 1-1, and they were demolished by Arkansas last week. But offensively for Iowa State, I think they should have a field day against a bad Arkansas State defense that is allowing 40 points per game. Then on the flip side, the Arkansas State offense just isn't great, and they're not going to be able to do much against a good Iowa State defense. But this game shouldn't be that close. I've got Iowa State easily 45-12. Moving on to Texas hosting UTEP. So Texas, they're coming off a good bounce-back win as they beat San Jose State very easily last week, and they'll face a UTEP team that's 1-1. And UTEP, they're led by former 5-star quarterback Malachi Nelson. And he leads an offense that's been pretty solid so far this year, scoring about 30 points per game. But I just don't see UTEP finding much success offensively against an elite Texas defense. Then on the offensive side of things for Texas, they were much better last week than they were in week 1. I think that continues against a not great UTEP defense. I think Arch Manning has another big game against a pass defense that has really struggled, and Texas wins easily 42-14. Moving on, we have South Florida at Miami. So this is an interesting game. South Florida, they've been great so far this year with upset wins over Boise State and Florida, and we'll see if they can knock off a third-ranked team in a row, as this week they face Miami. But a big reason South Florida's been so good is their defense. And their defense has been great so far this year. They allowed just 7 points against Boise State and 16 last week against Florida. But now the South Florida defense has to try to stop a Miami offense that is pretty good. Then on the flip side, the South Florida offense has also been good, and quarterback Byron Brown has been great. And his numbers aren't anything too impressive, but he's done exactly what South Florida has needed him to do. But South Florida, they face a Miami defense that is quite good, especially up front. So I do worry about South Florida's ability to protect the quarterback. But this is a game that can definitely go either way. I definitely think South Florida can get the third upset win, but if they're going to do that, they need to keep this game low scoring. Because the second this game becomes a shootout, then the advantage definitely goes to Miami. But I'm going to take Miami to get the win. I think this game is going to be lower scoring, but I just think Miami is going to be able to control the line of scrimmage. And I've got Miami with the win, and they beat South Florida by a score of 24-17. Moving on, we have Ohio at Ohio State. So Ohio State, they've been great so far this year, as they're 2-0. And they face an Ohio team that is extremely underrated, sitting at 1-1. And Ohio, they just upset West Virginia last week, and they almost beat Rutgers in week 1. Now, a big reason why Ohio has been so good is quarterback Parker Navarro, and he leads the team in both passing yards and rushing yards. Now, the problem for Navarro in this Ohio offense is they run into an Ohio State defense that is elite, and they've allowed 7 points in their first 2 games combined. Then on the flip side, Ohio State, they've been great offensively and just put up 70 last week. And the Ohio defense isn't bad, but there's no way they're slowing down this Ohio State offense. But I think Ohio could make this game interesting for the first quarter, but after that, Ohio State pulls away, and they win big by a score 45-13. Moving on, we have Western Michigan at Illinois. So Illinois, they've looked really good so far this year, and they're coming off a very convincing win over Duke. For Western Michigan, they have not been so good, and they're actually winless, sitting at 0-2, with losses to North Texas and Michigan State. But I don't have a ton to say about this game. Illinois is a good team, Western Michigan is not, and I've got Illinois easily 45-10. Up next, we got Arkansas at Ole Miss. So this is another interesting game, and a game where I could see an upset happen. For Ole Miss, they've been pretty good so far this year, although last week they weren't great, and only beat Kentucky by 7. Then for Arkansas, they looked great last week with a dominant win over Arkansas State. But on the offensive side of things for Ole Miss, they've been pretty good, although quarterback Austin Simmons has been a little shaky so far, and actually has more interceptions than touchdown passes. And that could be a problem against an Arkansas defense that has forced 2 turnovers in each of their first 2 games. Now on the flip side, the Arkansas offense has been great, and quarterback Taylor Green has gotten off to an insane start, as he has 11 total touchdowns in the first 2 games for Arkansas. But Green and the Arkansas offense, they match up against an Ole Miss defense that is pretty good. But this is a game that can definitely go either way. I think Ole Miss is the more well-rounded team, and I think their offense is better, but it's definitely possible that Arkansas gets the upset win, especially if Taylor Green continues to play at a high level. But I do have Ole Miss getting the win. They're just the better overall team, plus they're at home, and I've got Ole Miss by a score of 31-21. Next game, we got Florida at LSU. So Florida's looking for a bounce-back win after their upset by South Florida last week. And for LSU, they're 2-0, although they weren't amazing last week in their win over Louisiana Tech. Now, on the offensive side of the ball for LSU, they really need to get going. They're averaging just 20 points per game in their first 2 games, and that's definitely not what you would expect from an LSU offense that should be pretty good. But I think it could be tough for LSU to get going this week, because they face a Florida defense that has been really good so far this year, allowing just 9 points per game. Now, on the flip side, the Florida offense needs to be better than they were last week, and they face an LSU defense that has looked really good so far. But if Florida can find some offensive success, then I definitely think an upset is possible. But this is a game that can definitely go either way. I'm going to take LSU here because they're at home, and their defense has been elite so far. But I definitely think Florida's got the chance for the upset, but I've got LSU with the win, 27-21. Next game, we have Texas A&M at Notre Dame. So this is a big game for both teams. For Texas A&M, this is a great opportunity to get a good win before they start SEC play. And for Notre Dame, they're in pretty much a must-win situation from here to the rest of the regular season after they lost to Miami in Week 1. But offensively for Notre Dame, they were pretty solid in Week 1, and quarterback C.J. Carr looked great in his first start. Now, Notre Dame, they do need to run the ball a lot more effectively, and they were not good enough on the ground in Week 1, but I think that there's a good chance that will change, as they face a Texas A&M defense that has kind of struggled to stop the run, allowing 140 rushing yards per game, and allowed over 200 rushing yards to UTSA in Week 1. Now, on the flip side, Texas A&M, they've looked good through the air and on the ground, and quarterback Marcel Reed has been great with 8 touchdowns and 0 turnovers in their first 2 games. But Texas A&M's offense, they face a Notre Dame defense that is pretty good. They didn't play to their highest potential in Miami, but I definitely think Notre Dame is going to continue to improve, especially as they adjust to their new defensive coordinator, Chris Ash. But this is another game that can definitely go their way. Notre Dame, they didn't play that well against Miami, and they still almost won. They've now had a bye week to regroup, get ready for Texas A&M. I think they come out knowing they can't afford another loss. I think Notre Dame wins this game. I think they're a lot better running the ball and defensively. I think that leads Notre Dame to the win, and I've got Notre Dame by a score of 30-17. Moving on, we've got Vanderbilt at South Carolina. So this is another really interesting game here this week, and another game where I could see an upset. Vanderbilt has gotten off to a 2-0 start, and South Carolina has done the same, although they have been far less impressive than Vanderbilt. But offensively for Vanderbilt, they've been great so far this year, but they face a South Carolina defense that's pretty good, allowing 10.5 points a game. Now on the flip side, the South Carolina offense is a little concerning, and outside of Lenora Sellers, they really haven't been very good. And South Carolina offense, they match up against a very good Vanderbilt defense that's actually allowing under 200 total yards per game. But this is a game where, as I said, the upset is definitely a possibility. Vanderbilt, they've looked very good so far this year, and we've already seen them pull off a major upset when obviously they beat Alabama last year. Now, I don't love this South Carolina team, and I think they're overrated, but I still think they're going to get the win here. I don't think it's going to be very pretty for South Carolina, but I do think they'll just barely escape the win by a score of 23-21. And our final game, we've got Utah at Wyoming. So both these teams are 2-0, although I don't really think this game is going to be that close. Wyoming's offense has been bad this year, with just 10 points against Akron and 31 points against an FCS team. And they don't have a very tough task trying to score against a great Utah defense. Then on the other side, Wyoming's defense is pretty good, having allowed just 7 points in their 2 games combined. But this Utah offense has gotten off to a great start, and quarterback Devin Dampier looks great. But this game, I don't really think it's going to be that close. I've got Utah easily 34-3. But those are my Week 3 college football predictions. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, turn on notifications. I do my best to post as often as possible. Be sure to check out the community tab of my channel, where you guys can vote on who you think would some of these big games. But that's all for this video. I do my best to post as often as possible, and I will see you in the next video.